Good evening, friends. I have the proud privilege of welcoming Mr. Pradeep Gokte, today's speaker. Now, something about him. Uh, he is a HR professional with a career spanning nearly 50 years. It started in June 1974. He has handled diverse responsibilities in HR. If you look at the list of corporates for whom he has worked as far as HR is concerned, it itself is practically the who's who of the Indian corporate world. So he has worked for Godrej and Boy, Tata Power, Johnson and Johnson, TNT Skypack, Wärtsilä Diesel, Tata Donnelly, and eventually from Adfactors PR, he retired as Vice President HR in December 2012. Apart from this, he has bent in the academic world also. And as far as the academic world goes, he is taught at the best of the places. So, Indian School of Business, ISB Hyderabad, as well as the SP Jain Center, the Sandwich course, which is between Dubai and Singapore, which is a very prestigious course. He has taught both of those, and not just taught, he has taken the full responsibility as far as hiring faculty, organizing the course, and then onwards, he has gone on to be in an advisory appointment with the Indian Cancer Society from March 2016. From 96, he has taught in various courses in the faculty of various postgraduate schools of business. Currently, he is a full-time faculty, being an adjunct professor at Rizvi Management Institute. He teaches OB, he teaches organizational structures, strategic HRM, then managerial competencies, training, and talent acquisition, which is the most important thing for the success of a corporate. And he's going to speak about that today also among his lecture. Now, he's, of course, a professional life member of BMA. So he's our own person and also of the NIPM. And you can see the presence of the people despite there being a program of his own association, NIPM, running parallelly at IMC. So I'm sure they will benefit from the recording which will come out after a month's time. Uh, he's a very avid tennis player, and even at this age, he keeps fit by having a game of tennis every day in the morning. Apart from that, his music, aero modeling, astronomy, which is actually quite a wide range, and we would be happy once to hear from him about today's topic. Now, today's topic is recruitment revisited. So, I invite Mr. Pradeep Gokte, today's speaker, to begin his talk. Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Vishnu sir.
Welcome.
You know, I always have this confusion about starting a talk like this, because when I restrict myself to recruitment, then the question arises, where do I begin? And therefore, it's a good place to start, because at the end of the day, we are talking about hiring the right kinds of people into an organization. And that is something that everybody has said again and again for decades together, ever since industry began. There have been a few ups and downs as far as the types of people are concerned, as far as the kinds of recruitment patterns that we have seen. But over the last 50 years or so, there is something that we have tended to drift away into, which means away from the real requirement of recruitment. So let me turn to my PPT and then we'll start talking about what is the agenda, and then we'll go into the theme of the entire program. So let's take a look at the. Can you see my screen, by the way? Can all of you see my screen?
Sir, not yet.
Not yet. So I probably need to share the screen. So let me see. All right. So right. Are we?
Yeah, we are
Correct.
able to view your screen.
Very good. So let's get started. I'll make it full screen so that you can read a little better.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
And the question of revisiting recruitment is something that have started lots of friends of mine asking me questions. What do you mean revisited? It's the same thing. We need people and therefore we interview them and then we select them. But then when we start thinking about what are the various, shall we say, bits and pieces of the process of hiring people, then we come up with a lot of, shall we say, models of recruitment that most companies have adopted. And let's have a look at the agenda first. First of all, we're talking about what is the current practice. Most companies, what do they do? Then I'll speak a little bit about what I call the recruiter's phobia, which means his mental makeup, where he says that this is important and that is not important. So it's the mindset. I'll talk a little bit about two important criteria which define good recruitment, and that is employer branding, which means making a noise about your own company and saying what a great company we are and we are the employer of choice and we'd be happy to meet the best candidate. The second part is reputation management, which means when a company is really, shall we say, when people are talking about that company and they're talking good about the company, then we say, all right, this company has a good reputation. Then we'll move into what we call the aptitude, skills, and knowledge, the ASKs. And this is a term that I'm going to use maybe 5 or 6 times during this talk. What are the recruiter's aptitude, skills, and knowledge? I mean, what are his capabilities, his or her capabilities? What should they be and what are they? Then we'll move to two crucial questions. And this is where I'm getting into the absolute deep end of this subject. And therefore, I'm asking, does the recruiter really know what is the job to be done? And I'll quickly give you an example just to illustrate the point. I want a sales executive. हाँ, market में जाके माल बेच के आओ. That's the recruiter's job. That's the job to be done. And therefore, anybody who can talk, anybody who looks good, anybody who is fluent in that local language is a good hire. The second part is, does the candidate actually know what he is being interviewed for? Which means from the other side of the, shall we say, the stage, have we told the candidate enough about what is the work to be done? And he can't imagine it or she can't sort of dream what is the job to be done. Therefore, you have to tell them. My colleagues from the RISB Management Institute and I, we did a little bit of research on campus hiring from B schools. And it revealed a lot of issues that we are now going to sort of contend with and give you some ideas about what can be done. I've identified a set of mistakes that we make while we are interviewing candidates. So towards a more accurate selection, what should we be doing? And therefore, closing out the recruitment and therefore saying Eureka, in the sense, at last, we've got our best candidate. So this is broadly the agenda that we have for today. My sense is it will take about 45, 50 minutes, maybe a little more, depending on how much drift I give to myself. So what is the theme really? Let's talk about the theme. We're all in business. And business is the art of making money. Every single organization that you can care to mention, whether it's a panwala shop, whether it's the Hadgadi wala who delivers your AC or your refrigerator at home, or whether it is a huge big corporation like Tatas or Birlas or Ambanis or whoever, it's still about making money. I need to establish this with a little bit of firmness because business is also about a lot of other things. But right now we're going to talk about making money. And there are two ways most companies do. One is either make the product and then sell it, or you trade it, which means buying from X and selling to Y. Either way, the objective is to make money. So now, where does it all start from? The Ugam Sthan, if you call it. The Ugam Sthan is that somebody who is the business owner, let us say the mother and father of the organization, the person who really put together this idea that hum aisa karenge, ya hum ye banayenge, ya wo bechenge. So that idea or that dream or that aspiration actually creates for this person, the entrepreneur, a kind of mental roadmap, an idea of what he wants to do. Even today's startups that we talk about, the people who are just getting into business and setting out on their own, pulling in their own direction, they also have a mental roadmap. And that mental roadmap actually is about whether you're going to make the product or whether you're going to buy it from somewhere and then sell it to somebody else. And there are essentially 5 typical resources that we use. These are available to you and what is possible. So first is, of course, the place. You've got to, at least you need a table and a chair. And today's context, you need a computer to work on. If it's a manufacturing plant, then you will need obviously lots of equipment and machinery and technology. Then there are systems and methods and processes that they become your, shall we say, your guideline. It's the way that you're going to go about running your business. And obviously nothing happens unless there's money. Therefore, you either borrow the money or you've saved up or you want the money or you've gone into some kind of investment pattern. And therefore that you are looking for an ROI at the end of it all. Last of all, unfortunately, is people. Now I have a big argument about this on the next page. So let's understand that these are the 5 broad sources from which we run our business. Before I talk about this, think about the fact that for the huge pattern of, let us say, 100 years or so of industry that we've had, most of the time it's been the British Raj which has been ruling over us, and certainly maybe 200 years before that. If all of you remember your history, the East India Company was started in 1632 in Kolkata. So we're talking about something like maybe 390 years of life for industry. It was essentially a trading industry. But we got used to and we adopted the pattern of the Goras will rule us and we, the blacks, quote unquote black, we are the ones who will be ruled. And therefore, they developed in every single phase of life, whether you are farming, whether you are running an industry, whether you are owning a shop, there is a master and servant relationship between the owner and all the employees. And therefore, the basic theme of this master and servant relationship is command and control. I will tell you what to do and you will do it. There is a third angle to that, and that is what I love to call the white Saabs syndrome. The white Saab syndrome, unfortunately, has washed off onto us as we became brown Saabs. And today we talk about brown Saabs as being all the stalwarts of industry who are actually in commanding positions of strength within their own organizations. But we still have adopted the same style and the same methods by which to direct operations, to command and control. And therefore, we hire people and then we tell them, "Kitna paisa denge, you will work for us." So now the fundamental issue with recruitment is here. Before you start investing in any of these resources, every company actually thinks very seriously about all these things. They cost a lot of money, whether it's space for the office or the factory, whether it's all the machinery, whether it's all the methods and processes, whether it's money required, whether by funding or by borrowing or wherever. Do we pay that much serious attention to hiring the candidates? And I love to say this, and I will repeat it ad nauseum, but we take people for granted. Another way of looking at it is people are, they're there, 140 crores right now in our country. Many of them, of course, are not yet employable or they're past employable age, but then maybe 100 crores out of them are still employable. But they, because they are, I mean, you assume that they are there and therefore they can be handpicked. We also have the approach of saying that people by themselves, ek dhundo hazar milenge. I remember when I was in Tata Institute doing my personnel management course. By the way, for all those of you who are newcomers into industry, human resources used to be called personnel management in those days. And the personnel management course is equivalent to a 2-year postgraduate program. In that course, I remember vividly having gone for training into a textile mill. I was posted at the Tata Mills at Parel. And every morning at 7 o'clock, there was to be a person who was actually recruiting. There would be 70, 80 people waiting at the gate. And this individual was called a jobber. And this jobber would actually select and decide whom he wanted to hire, only for that day. Particularly in peak holiday season, when lots of the workers who were in the mills, they would go home for a holiday, for farming purposes, etc., or the wife had delivered, etc., There could be a हजार reasons. But therefore, there was a drop, a high peak absenteeism going on, and therefore they needed what they called badli workers. Badli means exchange for, in place of. So therefore, to hire these badli workers, this jobber was actually dictating terms. And this is the way he would actually pick up whoever he or she wanted. There was no she's, unfortunately, in the industry of maybe 50, 60 years ago. They were all gents who were hiring. But they took all these people also casually. Then our current hiring practices actually are this way. And I'll go swiftly over them because those of you who have actually recruited for your jobs or your companies, you know this pattern very well, that in recruitment, there are two real, shall we say, steps. One is how do you source and generate leads? Second is how do you attract and shortlist a set of candidates who are potentially capable of joining your organization. And then starts this long litany of 7 or 8 points. You test and assess and interview a person. Then you finalize the selection. Then you negotiate terms. After that, you check references. Then you go through a medical examination. Typically, most companies do a medical examination, and I can't overemphasize the need for a pre-employment medical, but it's there. And some companies ignore it, but it can be to their bad fortune as well. Then you make an offer, then the person gets appointed and joins. And then there's induction. So these 8 almost select themselves in the sense of this is part of the selection process, but this is exactly what we talk about. And everyone who's done any kind of recruitment would be going along this pattern. Now let's see where the phobia is, namely the mental makeup of this recruiter. Remember what I said in the beginning. This recruiter is a brown sahab. By virtue of this, he or she has a self-image about very strong in power, influence, and control. So whether it's the owner of the company or whether it happens to be an HR practitioner, you still have this thing about I have power over you. I am better than you. I know more than you. This superiority complex moves into another dimension, and that is we tend to dominate the conversation. Purists will tell you, and all the textbooks that I have read during my industry career, they will always say that, look, the interviewer should be speaking 20% of the time, and the candidate should be speaking for 80% of the time. That's a kind of rough and ready measure, which emphasizes that the candidate needs to talk more. You got to find out about the candidate. That candidate is not here to find out about you. But then again, that power and control and influence, that role starts taking over and you dominate the conversation. And then we come up with this fancy thing that I've spoken to him or her and looks good. Looks good itself is a misnomer because you're going on the basis of what I call kinesics. Kinesics is the science of body language. Therefore, how does a person walk? How does he talk? What kind of facial expressions does he or she have? Do they dress well? What is the style the person have? What does he do when you're interviewing on a rainy day, for example? Does he ask you or she ask you, where can I leave my raincoat or where can I leave my umbrella? And they're all embarrassed enough. Plus, of course, the adrenaline flowing up and down in your bodies to sort of, you are nervous. And therefore, that predominance of the body language drives your selection. Can you imagine, therefore, that we have failed to find out how good the candidate is on the basis of does he know the job? And the sad part is we don't. So academic credentials. So he's a B.Tech from IIT Mumbai, and therefore she has to be the best. That is an assumption up to a point. Automatically, everybody, for every Harish Munwani, as we say, or for every Yogi Deveshwar, or for every single person who has actually graduated from IITs and from IIMs, you may find 50 others who don't quite match up, but they've done their MBA. So there it is. We're still charmed by this thing called designations and qualifications. So therefore, the academic credentials tend to hold sway as far as the candidates' ASKs are concerned. Again, ASK, just to emphasize, it's the aptitude, skills, and knowledge. Let's see what's the role of employer branding. And right after that, we're going to talk about reputation management. Employer branding essentially says that this company is a great place to work, whatever great means. Then there is something called a shared meaning which a company has. It's the internal culture of the organization. It's the way things happen in the company. And everybody who joins the company, it's a kind of uh, uh, it's a sea into which all the good and the bad of life goes. And in that sea, there is a common feature, and that is a shared understanding of how things happen. Then a company needs to promote itself as being an employer of choice. How else are you going to actually market yourself? Those of people who actually study marketing, they study all the things about Michael Porter and about Philip Kotler and things like that. But do you recruit, do you actually make big noise about the fact that you are an employer of choice? That this is the company I'd like to work for a whole lifetime. How many people in their whole lifetimes have said, for example, I want to work for Tata's only, or I want to work for Godrej only. This is an employer of choice. Most people tend to get into a job which they can, which they should not necessarily, because if you change 3 jobs in 5 years, then fellows like me are going to say, hey, how long are you going to stay with me? Think about what it means to have continuity in a good organization. Then the company needs to be able to attract, hire, and retain all the ideal candidates, which means you have to have an internal support system by which all the people who are hired stay with you. Another feature, and this is a collection of 4 points, and you can see that it's free publicity for the company. Every time you announce that this company is looking for candidates, you're actually making a big noise about what are your principles and values and ethics, what kind of talent it really hires. Is there a fit between the talent and the jobs that are to be done? As well as from the employee's point of view, are you actually giving credit to the people who have done a good job? How do you recognize and reward them? Now we look at reputation management. And reputation management is a subject on which I love to have quarrels with this with some of my friends. Reputation management is essentially different for stakeholders and for shareholders. The shareholders obviously are going to think about what is my ROI only. Their interest is in, I've paid 10 rupees for this share. Am I getting better than 25? The stakeholder is every single person or every single, shall we say, community or every single corporate body or every corporation which has a stake in that organization. And I do a little bit of talking with my students also when I teach them that the stakeholder is somebody who can actually make or break the company's reputation. Imagine what kind of a role let's say the government of Maharashtra, let's say the Bombay Municipal Corporation, let's say BEST, if they decide to switch off power supply, your company or your housing society or your organization shuts down. If BMC does not collect garbage every month, every day from your homes and from your office area, and do not supply water to you, you are done for. So they are also stakeholders. If you want, they can actually make life miserable for you. And even in MTNL, but then the days of MTNL are unfortunately a little numbered. Most of us don't even talk about MTNL. We talk about mobile phones all the time. What others think and say about an organization, that's the simplest way you can define what is reputation management. What is reputation? That's how X or Y or Z talk about the organization. Then there are perceptions both externally and internally within that organization. A reputation gets built by essentially the ability to actually manage and solve all the crises and all the issues and all the problems that come your way. I say this to my students, and I'm repeating that at the risk of repetition. I know some of my students are here in the audience. Every problem that you've solved is a decision that you've taken. And if you turn the whole thing around, every decision you've made is a problem that you've solved. It's important to understand the correlation between problem solving and decision making. Now, what information, what communications, what do you talk to the whole world about your organization? What do you convey? What messages do you convey? And the candidate, I said this before, it also repeats itself here in terms of the reputation. Candidates must be able to perceive this company as an employer of choice. I'd like to work for this company. I'd like to stay here for the next 20 years. How many people actually, how many corporations actually say this? And then, of course, there is this huge big responsibility called CSR. And finally, just to distribute the idea of reputation, I've given you a few other words which are very close to the word reputation. You talk about respectability, you talk about credibility, you talk about reliability, honorable, admired. You are confident of that company, you trust that organization and its products or services. These are things that really build up the reputation of an organization. Now let's come back to our basic theme. We talk about recruitment, and therefore, for the ideal candidate and for the company that is interviewing them, first, the purpose is matchmaking. And it's a little like matchmaking when we talk about a boy and a girl looking at one another, judging whether they're the right fit. From the company's point of view, do they talk about their business? Do they talk about the domain in which they are, or the function in which their vacancy is, or the geography, which means which part of India are you going to be operating in? From the ideal person's point of view, how much do we talk to him about the job knowledge, as well as the skills, as well as the aptitude? Do we say you are going to be reporting to this gentleman or this lady? She is your department manager. What kind of peer group do you have? Which means what are the kinds of equivalents that you have? There may be 20 people who are all managers or all executives or all workmen within your team, and you are going to be the 21st workman. So you need to know what's the kind of flavor, what's the kind of demography that these people have. Are there subordinates who are going to be reporting to you? And then what is the environment of work? These are things that we very easily and conveniently ignore, primarily because the kinesics of every candidate tend to dominate. So therefore, a bunch of questions arise. Do organizations really know their company well? If they do, then what exactly do they know? So you must know how the business actually makes money first. Then you must know the domain and the function and the actual job to be done. And know the job means you should actually be working with the people and sitting there for hours together to understand what is it that you do all day. Sitting in a shift or sitting at the office table and are actually trying to understand, hey, what exactly is involved in your job? What are the critical elements of your job? What if you don't do this thing this way? What will happen? What are the consequences of failure? These are the areas. Just watching a person and observing as if you're watching the birds go by in the sky. That's not what we call understanding the job. You need to search for, know, and understand all those ASKs which automatically generate capability and competence. So when you sit with a person for a few days, perhaps, you actually get to know what is the work involved. And therefore, what are the special features that this person must be able to display, which really goes back to what are the types of questions I should be asking the candidate. Because answers to those will really give me the right path to take for hiring the best candidate. Another dimension, and this is something that we in HR probably tend to ignore a little. We think that we are the Lord and Masters, just like the Brown Saabs are. We don't involve the vacant positions, head of department, or the immediate superior in all these selections. It's only when the final interview comes along, then we say, sir, why don't you join us for the interview? He says, I haven't been through it, so I haven't even seen all the 25 people whom you've filtered out, and you're only presenting me with the last 5 candidates. Maybe one of those other 20 are really good enough. We must remember this, and this is something that I would like to sort of emphasize again and again, that the final selection is always decided by the HOD or the superior, not HR. And I want to comment a little on this point. HR facilitates, HR creates the processes, HR puts together a method and the systems and the principles behind recruiting. HR does not strictly speak recruit. They create the right kinds of climate. They actually identify the right kinds of people, and therefore the need for HR to understand what do you mean by the right candidate, and pick out all of them from your entire basket of options, and then say, okay, here are the 5 jewels in the crown that I have found for you, Mr. HOD. That we hardly do, because our shan and our pride is in signing the appointment letter, in negotiating terms with the candidate. Hey, but the actual job that has to be done, Who's supposed to be responsible for it? It's that HOD who's going to get work done, not you and me. So when we talk about recruiters, what they really want, what about the duties, tasks, and activities in the job? Have you established what we call performance standards? That anything below this, not acceptable in terms of performance. You do it. I used to be in Johnson Johnson for a long, long time, 9 years or so. Now, in that company, our performance appraisal system actually consisted of 4-point scales. You would get a green, a blue, a yellow, and a red rating. And the rule book says it in so many words. You cannot have more than one red rating in your lifetime. If you are working in our company for 25 years, if you've got more than one red rating, then HR has slipped up. By the second red rating, you should have been thrown out of the company. Now, when you establish something like this, then you're actually saying it's either this or nothing. You may be average, you may be good, you may be excellent as far as performance is concerned, but then below average, nothing else is acceptable. So have you set performance standards? And for every single job that a person does, there have to be performance standards. Then what are all these supporting techniques and technology? Everything is the machinery, the tools, the equipment. Today, we tend to believe that the computer is the only technology that we have. Hey, consider the people who are working in the manufacturing plant. Consider the machinery that they're supposed to use. And they're supposed to turn out from a raw material, a finished good, something that is sellable and something that will give you your money and your profit. We don't look at some of these techniques and the technologies that are involved. We tend to believe that technology means IT, and IT therefore means computers. The smaller the computer, the more fancy the gadget is, the more you seem to be knowledgeable, which is not true. And then understand the environment. How well do we understand our own company's environment? The physical working conditions, the hazards, the risks, and the problems that people have in going to work and going back. Plus, of course, you know that you have a whole string of people who are around you. Your boss, obviously, he or she. And then there are other superiors within the company who also have a role to play in the business of the organization. Your equivalent, the peer group, as well as maybe your subordinates. If you're joining at a middle management level, you probably have 20 or 50 or 75 other people who are reporting to you. Have you understood and have you been able to talk to your candidate about them? A few other things on this question of do recruiters know what they really want? I call these attributes, namely your education, skills, and knowledge. Then I talk about what is called 3 E's. And this is something that one of my ex-colleagues from Wärtsilä Diesel, again, a company where I spent about 13 years, he actually put this thing to me. He said, where is the spark? Can you really identify where the spark is when you're interviewing that candidate? I converted that spark into 3 E's that I felt were absolutely relevant. Does he or she have enthusiasm, energy, and excitement? If it's there about the job, then maybe that person is the ideal hire. Otherwise, think twice. Then the second A, which is aptitudes, and we talk about capabilities, competencies, and potential. And the fourth one is what we call attitude. Attitude is something most of the time that can't change. But it's the beliefs, the behavior, the character, the personality traits that an individual has. And therefore you're born, it's part of your DNA. And then you have your ability to create and develop interpersonal relationships. Now, do they check out all these things when recruiters are actually interviewing? What are the types of questions they ask? Let me go back and reflect to a little bit of research that we did maybe 6 months ago in our institute. And this was actually just a sudden idea in our mind. Hey, let's talk to a bunch of HR people and find out from them what exactly are they looking for when they come to B schools. And I'm talking about the B school context because that is the context in which we were chatting. So how do I improve the quality of my campus hiring? So that I can improve recruiter satisfaction. The recruiter has to be happy with the candidate who has been selected. Therefore, how can we really make our students interview ready? And there are a bunch of questions that I'm asking. What are the typical questions that I ask and what are the right answers? Then is there a correlation between the textbook knowledge and workplace practices, capability, competencies, and is there any preparation for the domain's function and the position specific? So now the question is, when they come to recruit from a campus, now whether it's an engineering college, and I've done a lot of hiring from engineering colleges when I was in Wärtsilä Diesel, as well as when I was in Johnson & Johnson, I used to go to B schools myself. The question is really, do recruiters know what they want and what they expect from their new hires? You'll be surprised with the answer. Most recruiters usually hire for numbers because their MD has given them a budget. 25 आदमी ढूंढ के लेके आओ. So this year your budget is 25 trainees, engineer trainees or management trainees or pharmacy trainees. If you're running a pharma business, get 25 trainees. Or are they for specific jobs? Most of the time, the recruiters don't have a very specific, well-defined job description, either function-wise or domain-wise. So they don't know what they're looking for. And therefore, the natural tendency is to relapse into saying something, acha, yeah, acha, he talks well, very smart, dressed well, shoes are all shining, therefore he must be good. Must be good. And there lies the big difficulty. Here is a sample of some of the questions that I've heard people ask. And I'm shocked that there are people who've been recruiting for years and years, probably meeting hundreds of candidates every single year, but they ask this question. And I'm sure many people in this audience also would have heard this or asked this question. What do you mean? What exactly do you mean when you say, tell me something about yourself? For me, as a recruiter, it means you haven't read my resume at all. Because aap mere samne maujud ho gaye, therefore I have to ask you 5 questions. This is the way I'm going to break the ice. Tell me something about yourself, really. And the candidate is left wondering, heck, I'm here for a job or am I here to do gupshup? And you ask about the family and you ask about residence, where do you stay? And then Jabalpur. I mentioned Jabalpur because there was an instance that I had. One candidate said he or she is from Jabalpur. The prompt response from the other people who were with me in the panel, one of them suddenly said, oh, Jabalpur, yeah, have you seen the Marble Rocks? Arey, where is the correlation between Marble Rocks and Jabalpur and you as a candidate for a job? But then you get talking and you're wandering around all over the place. And almost invariably questions like this get asked. Why so low marks in your academics, either in your 10th standard or 12th standard? Hey, the poor guy has already finished post-graduation and is up for a job. What difference does it make whether he got 45 or whether he got 65 in his SSC? He or she has already moved on in life. Then, what are the academic projects you did? It's somewhere it begins to smell a little of lack of preparation from the recruiter's side. And what are your free time interests? Do you actually play hockey? And if he says I play hockey for my school, then the prompt next question is, do you know who is the captain of the Indian hockey team? So I'm sure you will also have thought about all these things as we go through this. And then you talk about the type and the duration of your work experience. Oh, you work for 17 years. All right. How many jobs? So you work for five companies in the last 17 years. Fair enough. Looks good. Never mind. And we carry on. What is the kind of job you did? Did you make a success of that job? What were your performance standards over there? Did you get any promotions in your jobs over there? Those questions are irrelevant to the recruiter. Now, here is a bit of advice on what questions you should definitely avoid. You know, you tend to ask questions which are sensitive. You tend to ask questions that are embarrassing. What difference does it make whether the young guy is in a live-in relationship with somebody else? Is it going to affect the job that he or she is going to do? And which are irrelevant. Again, I don't want to describe what irrelevance means, but just what anything like that question on Jabalpur. Some candidates also, they have feelings too. Think about what questions can cause anger or resentment. And they'll come out and ask, मालूम नहीं है interview में क्या क्या सवाल पूछते हैं हमको, उटपटांग सवाल पूछ रहे हैं, and you're expecting me to reply. There are companies which ask for impossible commitments. What is the guarantee that you're going to stay with me for the next 5 years? Have you done your employer branding well? Does your company have a reputation? Are you an employer of choice? If it is, then this candidate is applied just because he or she thinks that you're an employer of choice. You seek personal information unless it's relevant to the job. Why get into all these issues? And then, of course, the dangerous areas like invasion of privacy. You know, when I was at the Indian School of Business at Hyderabad, I was interviewing a person who had stayed all his first 20 years or so in Kenya. He was an Indian, but 20 years in Kenya. After that, he went to the US and then worked, and he was working with some company. But he now wanted to come and work in India. So he visited Hyderabad and dropped in to meet me. And I said, looks like a good candidate. I was responsible for all the campus hiring from that institute. When I asked him a few questions, typically the way an Indian recruiter would ask, what kind of a family do you have and where do you stay in the US, etc., etc. I asked those questions. I liked the candidate. Unfortunately, he didn't join because some other reason probably took him away from us. But when I took him down to the restaurant to the dining hall for lunch, you know what this candidate told me? And it's something that really gives you a hard-hitting message about invasion of privacy. He said, sir, you've asked me all these questions about my family and my parents and my brothers and sisters. In the US, you could be hauled up by a court of law. And I was very surprised. I said, why? He said, you're invading my privacy. That's none of your business. I told you all the answers because I knew I was here in India. But in the US, you could be in trouble. You're not expected to ask these kinds of questions. So you can see how cultures tend to change. Here is another issue. You force argument and start discussing about something which is so insignificant that hey, it doesn't make a difference if the candidate is right or wrong. Are you going to then force your idea down his throat? No. So wake up to some realities of what candidates are and what kind of job you have available for them. I know I have something like about 15 minutes to go, so hopefully I'll be able to move fast enough. What is the candidate's knowledge about the job? I have 3 pages on this. I won't read through every word and syllable of this, but first is the position details. What is the position? Second part is what is the paisa on offer? Those of you who can read through this quickly, they'll be able to easily understand what we're talking about in terms of position details. There is a second aspect, and that is that of the job duties. In terms of job duties, do you have an accurate, concise, and complete job description? Second is, do you understand the complexity and the level of responsibility for each job? Third, as a candidate, do you know what are your key accountabilities? What sub do you have to give to your company or your boss? What are the quantifiable results expected? And then a statement of all the things that you're expected to do, namely your activities and tasks, namely your periodic to-do lists, and what are the authorities and permissions that you are required to give or take. The third part, and this is the most critical one and the one that most of us tend to ignore. What is performance standards? What will we judge your performance by? Therefore, what are your achievements at work? I have certain expectations from you, and these are the results I expect from you from all your work activities. Second question is obviously, what is the basis for measuring and assessing your performance? And there is a second segment to this that we call correlating all the key accountabilities and all the quantifiable results. And the third one is what are the boundaries within which this job is going to be done. For example, and particularly in finance, if you're hiring a person in finance, you've got to set very clear boundaries and limits to what you can spend on. Therefore, it's important for you to define very clearly, this is the standard by which we are going to hire. And then measure that person's performance according to those standards. The last is, of course, what you can do and what you can't do while doing the job. So therefore, my eureka for this goes into the next 2 pages. I think they're the last 2 pages on this presentation. First one talks about match every candidate's credentials with the job description. Second is avoid any kind of biases or perceptions or assumptions. Third is match the demographics with the competencies and capabilities. The candidate has to have that business and domain knowledge, without which he or she will be a no-no. Do we do any kind of simulator and trade testing? I used to do some flying at one time. My father was a career pilot for about 35 years until he retired in 1965. The reason I'm telling you this is I know a little bit about airplanes and flying. There is something called a simulator. And every pilot today has to go through what is called simulator training, which means before you get into a Boeing 777 and fly across the seven seas, you're first supposed to do so many X number of hours of simulator training, which is a box within which everything, that box actually moves every which way that the airplane will move while flying. And it has all the instruments and the gadgets which are in the cockpit. And it depends on how you handle that box. You're sitting there in the pilot seat and you're expected to fly that simulator. Now, that is one way of saying, hey, if you can sit over here, then you can probably fly the real airplane. Coming to the opposite, in the sense, diametrically opposite side, how many times have we actually interviewed a welder for an engineering department's job in the maintenance department and asked him, can you do high pressure welding? Do you know electrical welding or is it only gas welding? And what kind of welding do you do? Do you do a trade test for the guy and find out whether he has done a good job of welding or not? Now you can see that in every job, it's possible to create a testing mechanism. Then, is your focus on costs, on saving, and productivity? If it is relevant to the job, obviously you'll find out what are his or her managerial capabilities or supervisory capabilities. Like I like to say, the proof of the pudding is in the eating. It's important that you understand based on how the person eats, whether the pudding is good or bad. By and large, as far as recruiting is concerned, we have percentage weightages. And actually, you need to check out whether there is a culture fit or not. Your educational qualifications, your skills and abilities and knowledge and all that, yeah, they count for 60%. But 40% actually goes towards your culture fit, as well as those 3 E's I talked to you about: excitement, enthusiasm, and energy. The next page really talks about a box of typical things that HR should be asking questions on. What is your image like? What kind of personality do you have? Are you a culture fit, therefore? What is the appropriate technical knowledge for this job? How well do you know and how familiar are you with the company? Is there a correlation between your SWOT? We ask about SWOT. Do you know what is SWOT? What is your SWOT? But then why do you ask that question if you're not going to do any correlation between SWOT and the company you're hiring for? Whether it's your own company, whether it's you're the HR person there, or whether you're a consultant hiring for that company. Either way, you still need to understand where does this thing called SWOT fit into your questions. Do you have the competency to do this job? Can the company really afford you? There have been any number of occasions when I've interviewed candidates at relatively junior levels with about 4 or 5 years experience. And those guys are asking for 10 lakhs as the CPs. And when I say that I can't give you more than 8 lakhs because that's the limit that I have within me, either way, if you try to beat down the candidate, the best you can achieve is probably bring him down to 9.5 lakhs. Now, if there is no match, then there's no sense in going up the wrong tree, And then what is his interest or, the willingness, the eagerness to work in this company? Are you able to identify these? Then forget about all those technicalities which you don't know about. You don't know the job, but make sure that your interview team certainly asks those questions. In closing out recruitment, therefore, that means once you've done the hiring, then the selected candidate needs to go through all this drill of 6 or 7 different things. The announcement within the company, and of course, telling payroll that, look, here's a new joinee. He has joined us from today, 16th of December, and therefore his name should be added into the payroll. Then the joining formalities and the documentation that goes with it. The introduction to new people. Induction, socialization, immersion, you call it whatever you will. It's essentially helping candidates settle up. What work, what duties, and what responsibilities does that candidate have? Certain behavioral norms, dress code, code of conduct within this organization. And then, of course, what are the facilities available? Do we have a canteen? Where is the restroom? What do you do? What are your work timings, etc., etc., etc. And for the rejected candidate, the people whom you have met, but you have found unsuitable for whatever reason, you need to be able to send out a regret letter and say, I'm sorry, but we didn't find you. Your candidature and our requirements did not match. And wish that candidate best for his or her future career endeavors. That is the way I would see the entire process flow of recruitment. I don't know if it means a revisiting. For me, it's certainly Eureka time. And I would like to then say, check out your own recruiting process. Find out whether you're doing all these things. If you are, you're on the same table as I am. Every recruiter will earn several brownie points from their bosses for selecting the right candidate. Happy recruiting. Q&A time. Kanaya sir, over to you.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yeah, you're on the dot, and thank you for that wonderful exposition. I think I have a few questions which pop up in my mind, though I'm not an HR person, so to say. But of course, your questions, all of you, please put in the chat box, and Oindrila at BMA will share them with you. But before they do that, a question which I want to ask. You know, this is when I finished my CA, I got a rank, and so therefore I got letters from a large number of companies, especially top of the line companies. So I won't name the company, but it was one of the top 5 companies in India. Then it is also, it continues to be probably the largest business house with really great recruiting practices. So when I went to this company and for the interview, it was for a finance position as a trainee probably. So the only question which I was asked was, and I was really surprised, but I could answer some. They said, "Ki, we don't want to ask you anything. We want to ask anything about the company." Now, what is this approach and where will you fit it in? Because you're given an elaborate way of, especially on-campus recruitment. See, during my days, there was no on-campus recruitment, but probably what they did was the top 50 ranks they used to invite for interview. So how will you fit it in? Because this is a complete googly for me, as well as not expected. You know, normally you expect that there'll be questions, and so what do you make of it?
My view would be that this is one way of getting you to talk. And getting you to talk would mean that your perspective of what you want to do in life.
Okay.
You have come to our company for a job. We'll hire you provided you're able to give us a better, shall we say, a picture about who you are and what you want to do in life.
Okay.
That's the way I would read it. Beyond that, in the absence of any specific question that has been asked, there's little that I can.
Yes, I
really,
understand that. I understand that.
but you know, it goes back to a point that I made a little while ago about tell me about yourself.
Yes.
Now that's such a
No,
ridiculous
so when you
question.
said that, that's
what do you talk
really
about?
not the right question. So then I was putting that together and really wanting to know how it happened.
Very true.
Okay, there's just one more question.
Yes, sir.
That was about some employers. I'm trying to play a bit of a devil's advocate, if you don't
Sure,
mind.
please.
Especially the software companies and the companies which have complex processes of their own, or probably even models of working of their own. What these companies do is, I mean, I have had chats with HR people during the course of my interaction over the years. So what they say is, what we are looking for is people who have basic qualifications, who have an understanding. So for example, an engineer is supposed to have an inquiring mind, a problem solving approach. So they say we are not so much bothered if they don't know about the particular software which we are developing or the particular discipline which we are into, because they say we are anyway going to tell him to unlearn what he has learned in college and do it our way. So we give him an intensive training for 6 months and then we take him on board. So they even hire people like who are mechanical engineers or electrical engineers. So nothing to do with computer engineering. So what's your take on that? I mean, how good is it? Because it doesn't really match up with, knowing what technical skills they should be having. Here you're taking people who have basic, approach, attitude, capability, but not really in your particular discipline, right?
Sir, again, my reading would be that, and there are lots of companies which do this, that they are looking for a bunch of agile understanding, educated boys and girls who will be able to do any kind of job that falls in their basket.
Okay.
Now,
Okay.
one way of looking at it is that I will put him through his paces, provided I get to know him. But until now, I will do a certain amount of molding of this character, of the individual's integrity, of his basic understanding of the work, and then check him out for a variety of things. You know, when I was in Vatsila Diesel, we had created a trainees plan which was for 18 months. So every engineer trainee whom we hired from a bunch of RECs in those days, now they call them National Institutes of Technology.
Yes.
So
Yes.
we used to go to Warangal and to Trichy and to wherever else, Suratkal and this and that. And when we hired those boys and girls, then we said that there are three basic business areas in our company. One was manufacturing, obviously, at the factory at Khopoli.
Yes.
The second is what we called marketing and projects. And the third is what we called after sales service. Now, all these three are quite independent of each other, but all of them integrate towards building a powerhouse which is going to be sold, which is sold to a customer. Therefore, we didn't build that product until we knew who's placed the order. And
Correct.
therefore, to that customer specifications, we would put together a power plant.
Okay.
Now, for that, whether a person is really capable of doing after sales service and therefore spare parts, therefore maintenance, therefore repair jobs, etc., etc. Also in manufacturing, how the hell do we create a diesel engine, which is a huge hunk of steel? Or are you able to do design engineering and are you able to do project engineering? All these things, and you can only put them through the paces. So what we used to look for was just basic engineering skills. And when we talk about engineering skills, the principle was that look, an engineer is a person who has one, a quantitative thinking ability, understands logic, because then you're always talking about 2 + 2 is 4. An engineer will never say 2 + 2 is 5. So from that
Right.
fundamental
Right.
explanation, you begin to see that all right, the rest of it we will be able to manage. And we
Right.
had a whole bunch of managers who were very, very capable of actually putting them through their paces and molding them.
Thank you so much. You have answered it well. Now, Harish Binde has a question. What he's mentioning is that you're not referred to ethics, which is a very important characteristic of any employee. Can you please throw light on how important it is according to you and how do you measure it? So ethics as far as employees are concerned, and the measurement aspect of it, which he has mentioned, brings me to another question, that are you in favor of psychological tests at the time of testing when you are interviewing people, or is it not really a good idea? So one is ethics and this is on measurement. I have this. Okay.
All right. First is the answer on ethics, so that I'll be short and sweet about that. That ethics is something which is part of your character, part of your integrity. It is part of what you show out as your personality to the outside world. And you can't very much change. But then you have to ask the right questions to be able to get down to, shall we say, the ground level and get an explanation on what exactly ethics means to you. It in very simple terms, it means doing the right things, not doing the wrong things, doing what is good for the organization and not doing what is bad for the organization. And beyond that, of course, ethics is a huge big subject on which you could go on for hours and actually discuss the whole matter. Connected with that is your question on psychological testing. Psychological testing has a certain, well, shall I say, it's an Americanization of the entire subject of recruiting. I'm not saying I'm against psychological testing, but do you have the wherewithal, which means are you licensed actually to check out that psychological testing will reveal whatever data, and that data, is it valid in India? 99% of the time, and 99% of this audience is going to be looking for jobs in India, or they're already doing jobs in India. In which case, then it doesn't really matter whether your psychological tests show that you are either. Of course, there are a lot of psychological tests, and we in our organization behavior classes, we do teach all these psychological tests. There is a Fairobi test, and which is about the ability to work together with others. There is a Belbin test. There is also an MBTI. It
Right.
can work to a certain extent, but those indicators, for example, whether you're an extrovert or an introvert. Now, it can't really be spelled out. And what
True.
an American means
So
by
true. In
extrovert
fact,
is not the same as you and I understand extroversy.
as you
You know?
rightly said, there are a lot of
Huh.
people against it also. Just
Very.
one clarificatory question from Harish, and
Okay.
he's wanting to know if there is any methods to measure ethics. So whether you could measure ethics. Of course, I mean, I would say that I'm aware that there are many kind of tests when when you communicate about ethics in the organization to an employee, you have them answer some questions, and that
That's
gives you an idea. But if you are aware of anything better, testing ethics,
okay.
you could probably share it.
No, I don't. I have
Some-
no information about any tests to check what kind of
Okay.
ethical standards you have.
Okay.
I think your behavior and your character, they display it in due course.
Right.
And a person who is unethical would behave in a particular way, which is negative to the organization, negative to the self,
Mm,
negative to everybody around you. So somewhere the
True.
principles of the correct way of living
Probably
life,
it would come
I
up
think
in
it's
assessment or even in background checks.
true,
For
true,
example,
true.
nowadays background checks are very detailed.
Yeah,
So
yeah, yeah.
uh,
Very true.
you would
But I don't
probably
know of any real valid empirical test to establish whether a person is ethical or not. I
right.
have no information.
Right, sir. Uh, if you have questions, please put them in the chat box and I'll ask them. Please do that. In the meantime, just one more thing which you mentioned, and as a part of the orientation, I've seen that normally a lot of companies have these buddy system, and those buddies remain on for a long time. Do you think it's a good idea? Because normally it's a person in the same department. So does it work? Have you seen it work, especially?
Yes, yes,
Hmm.
I have.
Hmm.
Yes, I have. And in Wärtsilä Diesel, where I spent a long time, this buddy system really worked very well. In fact, there were cases where uh, two people would share a room and they would really become buddies of each other over a period of time during their training period. This pair, coincidentally, were in manufacturing first, so they were in their own room all the time while they were living there for the first 4 months of their training. The next 4 months were an after sales service, which was then going to the customer site and actually putting together the power plant. At that time, one of them had an injury, and the injury was quite severe. And it was this person who was also with him that he actually helped him move into an ambulance and then to the hospital and funded the initial paisa before, of course, we rushed in, helped
Right.
him, paid for the insurance money, etc., etc.
Okay, that's great. Now, another thing, I mean, nowadays we are working online, so most employees, there are quite a large number of employees. In fact, in large companies, you have 40% of them, up to 40% of them continuing to work from home and away from the office. So, during this pandemic, you must have come across probably interviews have also been taken online, and especially when there's overseas interviewing for jobs, that is what happens. So, how do you think how effective this online interviewing is, especially considering that you have a whole lot of questions and you have a whole lot of understanding coming out of it? So, a simple interview, one would understand, okay, I ask a few questions, I look at his body language, that may be possible online. But well, how do you think how effective online interviews are in the context of what you have explained is essential for good recruiting?
Well, I've experienced some online interviewing, and we call it remote hiring nowadays. And by coincidence, my students in Rizvi Institute are doing a project report on that right now. So one of the topics that they have actually identified is remote hiring. Now, remote hiring has 2 or 3 very basic flaws in it. And that flaw, in the sense, is not something that's wrong, but it's something that you miss out on completely. Your body language does not come through because most of the time you're on the phone or you're on the WhatsApp while you're talking to one another. Second thing is, whatever your psychological methods are of solving problems, how does your mind work? That doesn't get revealed. You cannot actually see the nervousness or the shall we say the anxiety that I want this job. You can't see it in
Yeah, the spark
a remote
probably you
work
can't make out in an
Very
organization.
true, very true. So you're right. It leaves about 40% unsaid because you don't really have an absolute understanding of the candidate.
Okay,
I
but
had
then,
one. I had one
please.
very interesting situation. This was when I was in the ISB and I was handling placements over there. Now, these were students who were actually, many of them were 30, 35, 40-year-old people. In fact, the senior most person we had in that first batch of 2001-2 was a Sardarji who retired as a commander from the Indian Navy. And then he had joined after doing his NDA and then maybe 20 years of sailing or 15 years of sailing, he had come to do a management course with us. Now, in that batch, there was a person who had worked with Wipro in Japan. And his interview was therefore done by a company called Cognizant Technologies from Kolkata and Chennai. Cognizant Technologies was doing a video interview with him. And he happened to be a very smart candidate,
Okay.
but somehow it didn't work out. And when I talked to the Cognizant Technologies people, the people who had hired from our institute itself, I said that, look, this candidate happens to be a damn good candidate. If you're talking to him about working in your organization, then have you tried to identify how does he fit into your organization? Having worked in Japan for so many years, and they were unable to do that, but they said, no, I don't think we'll take him.
Okay.
So, in fact, they had rejected the candidate, but then I was actually batting from my students' side. Naturally, that was my job. So
Correct. Yeah,
trying to
true.
make sure that all my students are placed happens to be the primary principle of being in placements.
Okay. There are a couple of more questions now. I'll deal with them quickly.
Sure.
Farooq Sidhwa has asked, person being interviewed reports to an executive who is 3 levels below the HOD. Who should interview? So that is whether the HOD should interview or that person who is probably 3 levels below the HOD.
Oh my God, this is a little complicated. It throws up a lot of arithmetic also into the whole issue. I would say that this position, every position in an organization is part of a hierarchy. And therefore, structurally speaking, whoever that position is going to report to, that person should be interviewed.
Okay.
So whether
Fine.
it's 3 stages
That-
below
that-
the HOD or not,
That's
is
absolutely
very
clear.
small
Correct.
matter. But
Okay.
whoever this candidate is going to report to, that
Right.
person should interview and decide and select.
Right. Now, Revati has asked another question. This is a slightly tricky one. I mean, probably things like this happen. It looks like something which has been experienced or within the knowledge. As a consultant, when you work with well-known corporates and HR gives you certain assignments, consultant goes through all possible portals, social medias, and finally validates right candidate and shares CVs with HR.
I'm sorry, Kanesh sir, you'll have to wait for a minute. I got a little disturbed. Can you
Okay.
repeat the question, please?
Okay, I will.
My
I will.
apologies.
I will. Not at all. See, so as a consultant, when you work with well-known corporates and HR gives you certain assignment, as a consultant, you go through all this social media, this, that, you validate the right candidate and share with HR. After organizing, personal interview, HR informs that the candidate was not selected. But after a few months, recruiter comes to know he has already joined the same company and the HR has not bothered to inform the consultant. How can that be stopped, or how can consultant question the HR for cheating? Probably, I think the payment is related to the candidate being onboarded or not. So that's probably the question.
I
mean, if you
suppose
could-
so. It's
Not
a little difficult
exactly
to
a
answer
part of
this.
what you are dealing with, but well, if you can answer it.
It's difficult to find a real answer. There must be
Okay.
some very deep
Yes.
issues involved.
Understand.
Why you avoided HR and then found the job directly through your other sources or other
Right.
methods.
Okay.
Very difficult to explain
Yeah,
unless
true.
you know the exact situation
Right.
and the exact circumstances.
Okay. Now, what should be the time limit? This is a question by Santosh. What should be the time limit from resume shared by a consultant to final selection? Duration of time. What does it say of an organization?
Okay.
So, is there
I'll give
anything
you.
like a time limit?
This is a tricky question. I'm going to answer it in a tricky way.
Okay.
Every time a position is announced, the recruitment is required to be done yesterday.
Okay.
And when I say yesterday, it means since the vacancy exists, every moment that the vacancy exists further, that job is not being done.
Right. Correct. So
I mean,
it's
unless a body has to fill in that position so that work can be accomplished.
actually
And
right.
therefore,
Arun.
every delay is time lost.
Very true, sir.
So therefore, but then immediacy has this big danger that you tend to hurry and therefore you compromise on quality. Now you got to decide whether that compromise on quality is really what you want, or do
Right.
you seriously want somebody very good and therefore must fit into the organization's requirements.
Yeah, there's a question from one of the participants, and I think for all of them, I'll just clarify that. And those who want an access to the recorded video, please subscribe to the BMA YouTube channel, and it will be posted there in a month's time after it's properly edited and fine-tuned. So you will get it in a month's time on the YouTube channel, right? I think Andrela ma'am.
Yes, sir.
That's all. Any more questions, or we could probably then.
Yeah, if anyone wants to unmute and ask Sir Pradeep sir any question, they can also ask.
Yeah, you can please unmute and ask directly. Otherwise, we'll now be concluding.
Sure. Let me try.
Right. No, but I think you are so lucid, and your presentation was so nicely paced, well paced. I think what you mentioned when we were having a chat before, in fact, we had a small chat before the presentation. So he said that I'm an HR person, and although only a few videos were on, he says I will be able to judge from their responses as to what I should be emphasizing on and whether it's going smoothly. So I can assure you, sir, you are so lucid that not being an HR person, it really brought home many points and many aspects. I was just trying to put in, often as a finance person, I am called for interviewing people, especially teachers, professors in colleges. So now, of course, we'll be more tuned as to what to ask. But yes, that first question which you mentioned as to tell us something about yourself is almost always there. Although, let me tell you that the point which you made about trade testing is something which is often done in good colleges. So we have them take lectures,
Correct.
as for teaching students as well as teaching us eventually, those 4 or 5 who are shortlisted. So thank you, sir, for a very insightful and wonderful presentation. You kind of provided us in a very short span a manual for recruiting, I would say that. And that's something which is very tough, very difficult. It's a complex question, and you were really able to put it across in a very short and succinct manner. So thank you once again for your wonderful presentation. And we would look forward at BMA to hear more from you on subjects related to HR. And the testimony of your knowledge, like all those who have logged in, all of them are there continuously paying rapt attention to your lecture, as well as given that your own association's competing program is there, we had a very good presence. So thank you once again. And here is Vishnu Kanere, an executive committee member, signing off for the day.
Thank you
Manjula
very much,
ma'am,
Kanere
over
sir.
to you. Yes, you're welcome, sir.
Your appreciation is much accepted and appreciated by me. Of course, I do have a very long association with BMA also, having been
Right.
its
Yes,
member
you've been on the
since
executive
whatever,
committee yourself
1983 or 84.
in the 90s. So
That's
yes,
true. That's true.
right.
But thank you very much. And for all the audience over here, I hope you liked the presentation. I hope you liked some of the ideas that I gave. I don't know if all of it is workable, but I'm sure you can give it a try and see how much closer you can be to that single job that has to be hired for. Once you get closer to that job, get down to actually the earthy essentials, what is required to do this job. And then you'll be able to find the right candidate. Thank you very much. Take care of yourselves. All the best. And all the best for the new year that's coming up 15 days from now.
Very
care.
true, sir. Thank you
Bye-bye.
so much.